In the middle of the icy deserts of Antarctica, on the outskirts of the National Science Foundation research base, Jerry wakes up for another day's work as an expedition guide and sets off to wake up his group of trained dogs. After cheering them up for a while, the man begins to feed the animals, at which point he notices an airplane landing on the corporation's runway. As he approaches, Jerry realizes that his ex-girlfriend Katie has just arrived to visit, and he welcomes her along with his work partner Charlie. Soon after, the pair are introduced to Dr. Davis, a scientist who will be working with the corporation for some time. Jerry then asks if the doctor is excited about carrying out his work in the Dry Valleys region. However, Dr. Davis reveals that he will be traveling to Mount Melbourne so that he can look for the meteorite that seems to have fallen in that area. Noticing that the guide is apprehensive, the man asks why he is so worried, and Jerry explains that if they want to go to that mountain, they would have to travel twice as far as they would to get to the Dry Valleys. In addition, the guide explains that as it is January, the ice is very thin, so the expedition will be extremely dangerous and can only be done with the help of their dogs. Despite the dangers, Dr. Andy says that the journey can still be completed, and tells that in the past, the Huskies have lived in the vicinity of the icy mountains without any difficulty. Even though he's disappointed with his superior's decisions, Jerry knows better than to argue with him, and after ending the conversation, he leads his dogs to their leashes so that they can sleep. The next day, Dr. Davis meets the guide outside, and after introducing each of the dogs in his team, they say goodbye to the rest of the employees, so that they can begin their expedition to Mount Melbourne. During the journey, the pair arrive at a large frozen river, and Jerry changes the formation of the dogs so that their weight is distributed, preventing the ice from breaking. Soon after, the guide notices something strange happening to the ground and realizes that they are on top of a gigantic glacier, so they have to walk carefully from now on. So that he can guide his dogs more easily, Jerry takes the lead and asks Davis to control the sled so that he can accompany him while he carefully analyzes the support of the ice. Suddenly, the guide finds a crack in the ground and asks the doctor to help him command the direction in which the dogs are walking, so that they can get around the area more safely. However, even though almost all the animals have understood Jerry's commands correctly, Max, the new husky in the pack, ends up getting confused, and being one of the strong ones, he ends up pulling the sled in the opposite direction. Desperate, the guide shouts for the dogs to return immediately, and Dr. Davis tries to break the sled, but nothing seems to work. Thanks to this, the man ends up opening a hole with the vehicle, creating a gigantic ravine just below his feet. Before his companion is wiped out by the fall, Jerry shouts for him to hold on to the sled and pulls the ropes together with his dogs, managing to rescue Davis. Once they're back on their feet, the guide explains that you should never take so many trinkets on a trip to Mount Melbourne, since at this time of year, safety in the ice desert is even less. Irritated, the doctor says that Jerry had agreed to go on the expedition, but the man replies that he couldn't go against his boss, as it would bring him big problems. Despite the incident, the pair find a safe place to camp for a few hours, and in the morning they continue their journey. Sometime later, Jerry and Davis finally reach Mount Melbourne, where the doctor begins to search for the location of the meteorite. Far away, the other employees are relaxing inside the research base, and suddenly, the site manager receives an emergency call on the radio. When he answers, Dr. Andy receives an alert that a major storm is approaching, and the communicator orders all teams to return to their posts immediately. Without wasting any time, the boss asks Katie to warn Jerry as soon as possible, and while preparing some hot drinks, the guide hears his friend's voice on his radio. The problem is that the strong winds in the area end up intercepting the communication, causing the woman's voice to be cut off several times. Despite this, Jerry manages to understand his friend's warning and asks how long they have before the storm reaches the outskirts of Mount Melbourne. However, before Katie can answer the question, communication is interrupted and Dr. Davis asks what's going on. Jerry then replies that a storm is approaching, and they will return to the base as soon as they wake up the next morning. The problem is that since he hasn't had enough time to find the meteorite, Dr. Davis tries to reason with his guide, saying that the extraterrestrial geode could bring unimaginable discoveries to science. Even though he is reluctant because he knows that this could be an extremely dangerous decision, Jerry decides to allow them to stay at the site for a while longer, and says that they will leave at midday. Encouraged, Dr. Davis accepts his guide's conditions, and the next day, the pair sets off in search of the meteorite debris, leaving the dogs at the campsite so they can get some rest. During the exploration, Jerry uses his red flags to mark out the safe zones on the mountain, and after a few hours of searching, the scientist finally finds an intact fragment of the meteorite. Excited, Dr. Davis walks towards the object, leaving the guide desperate, as he is no longer in the safe zone and is therefore in great danger. However, the man manages to get back to Jerry without difficulty, and now that they have found what they were looking for, the pair prepare to leave. Just then, Dr. Andy receives another alert from the communication center and discovers that the speed of the storm has intensified. Worried, Katie goes to the radio to alert Jerry, who is on his way to the base with Devis. During the journey, the guide notices that one of the dogs seems to have an injured paw and interrupts the journey so that he can bandage it. Meanwhile, the doctor takes the opportunity to get information about the state of the storm, but thanks to a distraction, the man ends up approaching one of the cliffs, causing him to slip tens of meters to the ground. Desperate, Jerry runs to see if the scientist is all right, and he tells him that his leg may have been broken during the fall. Just then a large crack opens up around the thin ice, and thanks to this, the doctor ends up falling into the water. Trying to calm the situation, Jerry shouts for the man not to struggle, but to hold on to the edge while he tries to reach him. The guide quickly gets his dogs together to rescue the scientist, who is finding it increasingly difficult to breathe. So that he can reach his companion, Jerry asks Maya, the pack leader, to take the rescue rope and walk crouching towards the man. Thanks to this, Devis manages to grab the rope, and after getting the animal back to him, the guide starts pulling the doctor along with his dogs. Now that he's rescued his companion, Jerry says he's going to take him back to the base as soon as possible, because he knows that due to the extremely low temperatures the man has been exposed to, they can't afford to waste a second from now on. To prevent the doctor's condition from getting any worse, the guide puts him inside the sled and controls the pack at the back of the vehicle. Due to the enormous distance from Mount Melbourne to the research base, the group is unable to arrive before the storm starts, so they are forced to face the powerful blizzards during the night. Worried about the whereabouts of her companions, Katie tries to contact Jerry repeatedly, but to no avail, and as time goes by, the researchers become increasingly apprehensive. A few hours later, the woman goes to the window, where she sees the pack emerging from the blizzard together with the sled, and calls everyone to come and help the team. Quickly, the employees rush to rescue Jerry and Dr. Davis, who are taken inside. Noticing that the guide has had the tips of his fingers severely damaged by the cold, and that the scientist may end up losing his broken leg, the group decides to prepare the emergency plane so that they can take them to the hospital. When Jerry hears this, he says that he wants to stay there to take care of his dogs, but Dr. Andy says that this won't be possible, as the condition of his hands is highly critical. Trying to calm her friend down, Katie promises that she will return to pick up the animals and take them away from the base. Trusting the woman's words, Jerry decides to go ahead with the plan, and while taking Dr. Davis to the aircraft, the guide realizes that Max has escaped from his collar. The man quickly asks Charlie to help him put the dogs on their leashes so that they don't run away during the blizzard. Despite knowing that the Huskies are completely used to the extreme cold, Jerry can't help feeling worried, and before leaving, he says goodbye to Maya, promising to return as soon as possible. Hours later, the group arrives at McMurdo Station, where Jerry and Dr. Davis are treated by the medical department. As soon as he wakes up, the guide runs into Charlie and asks how the rest of the group is. Encouraged, the young man says that Dr. Davis is recovering, but due to a worsening storm, Katie was prevented from returning to the base. Upon hearing this, Jerry wastes no time in leaving his room to find the woman, who tells him that the blizzard has intensified in the last few hours, and thanks to this, all the winter teams have been dismissed. This means that the teams will only be able to return to their facilities with the arrival of spring, and the guide begins to despair. Trying to find a way to reach his dogs, Jerry goes to the corporation commander and begs the man to allow him to use one of the planes to rescue the pack. However, the old man explains that thanks to the intensification of the storm, dozens of teams are still stuck at bases around Antarctica, and the only planes left are unable to get through the blizzards. Desperate, Jerry asks the commander not to force him to abandon his dogs in the cold, but the man admits that there is nothing that can be done, and apologizes for the loss. Feeling devastated, the guide rests in his room and is visited by Katie, who tries to console him, saying that the pack is extremely resistant to ice. Jerry then replies that he had tightened the chains before leaving, because he thought he would be back in a few hours. Upon hearing this, Katie tells him that she didn't want to disappoint her friend, and the guide reveals that he didn't expect her to keep her promise, causing the woman to get angry and leave. 4 days pass, and the dogs are still on their chains, and even though it's snowing heavily, Maya remains seated, waiting for her master to return. Meanwhile, Jerry travels to the city of Washington and tries to find some way of receiving donations and aid to fly to Antarctica again, but the officials at the agencies explain that this would take too long. In the midst of the great winds caused by the storm, the dogs realize that the flag of the research base has been torn down, and thanks to this, the pack begins to get agitated, causing several dogs to break free from their leashes. As he hasn't received any help from any institution, Jerry decides to pay Dr. Davis a visit, and after handing over the photograph they took with his dogs, he asks his friend to help him get back to Antarctica. The guide also tells him that after being recognized for the discovery of the meteorite, the scientist has become extremely influential, so he could help him return to the base and rescue his animals. However, Dr. Davis says that even if Jerry managed to return, the rescue mission would be a failure, since many days have passed and the region is at a temperature of -10 degrees. Saddened, the guide tells him that he needs to make sure his dog friends are okay, but the scientist decides not to help him, as he knows that any attempt to travel to the base would be extremely dangerous. Even after more than 2 weeks alone, the dogs are still waiting for Jerry to return, and suddenly Max sees a seagull landing on the base structure and starts barking excitedly. Thanks to this, all the other dogs wake up and the pack begins to chase the bird around the ice desert. Despite the excitement of her companions, Maya notices that Jack, the oldest member of the group, doesn't seem to be feeling well, and tries to cheer him up so that he gets up and runs with them. The problem is that the dog can no longer get up, and so that they can get more food, the pack leader decides to get together with the rest of the dogs and ambush a group of seagulls. While they're trying to come up with a strategy, Max ends up barking at the birds, which are chased away. Realizing that the animal isn't skilled enough to carry out the hunt, Maya asks him to stay away from the ambush site and orders the rest of the pack to prepare to attack the prey. Quickly, the leader runs towards the seagulls, which start flying in the opposite direction, allowing the other dogs to capture the birds with their mouths. Now that they have obtained food, Maya takes one of the birds to Jack, while the rest of the dogs devour their prey. Noticing that his companions haven't brought him any seagulls, Max feeds next to one of the huskies, who allows him to come closer to devour some of his food. A long way from there, Jerry arrives in Oregon, where he returns to his trailer after months of working away. As he listens to Katie's messages on his phone, the guide looks at one of her photo frames, which has a picture of him next to his pack, making him increasingly worried about them. It's been 50 days since the dogs were left to survive alone in Antarctica, and despite the difficulties, the group has managed to stay alive, and at night, they play with the reflections of the aurora borealis. However, thanks to the distraction caused by the lights, Dewey ends up losing his balance, causing him to fall dozens of meters down one of the mountain slopes. Desperate, the dogs run at high speed to help their companion, who is lying on the ground completely weakened. Realizing that Dewey won't be able to get up, Maya and the rest of the huskies decide to stay by their injured friend's side, and Truman lies down next to his twin brother to keep him company. In the morning, the leader wakes up with her pack and notices that the dog has not resisted his injuries. Press F for Dewey. On discovering that he has just lost his big brother, Truman feels devastated and says goodbye to Dewey one last time, crying because he had no chance of saving his life. Despite this, Maya knows that they must continue their journey in search of food, and sets off with her companions. The problem is that, as the youngest member of the group, Max doesn't understand why Dewey was left behind, and goes back to try and wake him up. However, Maya doesn't notice the absence of the youngest member of the group, and goes off with the rest of the pack. At that moment, Max realizes that his group is no longer in his field of vision, and thanks to the blizzard, he can't meet up with them again, so the poor animal is left behind. Back in town, while doing some of his kayaking lessons, Jerry is visited by Katie, who reveals that she has brought Brandy, her new pet dog. While they're having fun with the animal on the beach, the woman asks her friend to stop blaming himself for what happened to his dogs, but that doesn't mean he should forget who they were. Thinking about Katie's words, Jerry decides to pay a visit to Mindo, the husky trainer who was responsible for the pack he adopted. After they meet again, the guide gives the man his photo album and apologizes for not having been able to protect them. Upon hearing this, Mindo tells Jerry that he must honor everything his fellow dogs have done for him, and says that the most important decision he will have to make will be what action to take in order to obtain peace in his heart. Later, Jerry returns home, where he discovers that he has received an invitation from Dr. Davis to attend an event celebrating his scientific discoveries about the meteorite. Meanwhile, Maya and her pack have been surviving on their own on the outskirts of Antarctica for over 130 days, and during one of their explorations, the leader finds a hut belonging to one of the region's research units. Thanks to this, the group of dogs manage to find a pantry full of food, allowing them to feed themselves once again and have a place to shelter from the blizzard. A few kilometers away, Max ends up back at the research base, where he tries to call out for his master at the door of the facility, and as he gets no response, he decides to sit and wait for Jerry. On the night of the celebration, Dr. Davis meets up with his friend again, and Jerry reveals that he is leaving on a trip to New Zealand, where he intends to pay for a ride to get south and find his dogs. Before he can answer the guide, the scientist is called away by the rest of his colleagues, and as he doesn't want to disturb the evening, the explorer bids him farewell. At home, Dr. Davis goes to his son to say goodnight, and as he does so, he comes across a drawing made by the boy, who thanked the heroic dogs for saving his father's life. After more than 150 days of being abandoned, the Huskies continue to fight for their survival, and while exploring alone, Max comes across the body of a huge orca, which seems to have been stranded during the storm. However, before he could feed on the remains of the animal, the dog was surprised by a gigantic sea lion, which frightened him into fleeing. Just then, Max comes across the rest of his pack and is thrilled to have finally reunited with them. Realizing that this is his chance to prove that he has honed his skills, the dog returns to the orca's carcass and steals a piece of the animal, attracting the predator's attention. Thanks to this, the sea lion dives in to attack Max, allowing the pack to run off to feed on the orca's body. The problem is that the predator realizes the dog's strategy and, in revenge, returns to the orca's body and bites off Maya's paw. Enraged, Max jumps on his enemy's back and starts attacking him, along with Truman, who grabs one of the animal's fins. As he is surrounded, the sea lion runs back into the water, leaving the pack alone. Worried about his leader, Max tries to calm Maya down, and after recovering from the attack, the dogs gather to feed on the orca's body. In the middle of the New Zealand docks, Jerry tries to convince some fishermen to take him to the Antarctic coast, but without success, and during his search, he comes across Katie. Confused, the man asks what his friend has come to do there, at which point Charlie and Davis appear, and the scientist reveals that he has managed to set aside part of the proceeds from his research to help his friend. The group then travels in a helicopter to Antarctica, where the pack awaits the return of their master. After some time, Jerry and his friends land on a gigantic ship, which is heading for the ice desert, making its way through the glaciers. However, in the middle of the journey, the navigation is interrupted by thick sheets of ice, and Charlie reveals that he has a plan to get around this situation. The cartographer explains that one of the research bases in the region has an extremely powerful vehicle and they can use it to reach the dogs. So the group sets off to start the plan, and in the middle of the ice desert, the Huskies complete another hunt for seagulls, while they complete 175 days surviving alone. So that Maya can recover, Max gives her his bird, but the leader refuses to allow it, and as an apology for abandoning him, she orders the rest of the pack to give the gulls to the newcomer. Despite this, Max shows that he doesn't want this to happen, and gives his food to Maya once again. Noticing that their companion doesn't want to leave them hungry, the dogs pick up their birds again, and while their leader is unable to feed, Max remains by her side. Nearby, the research group reaches the marked base, where they take the vehicle to begin the rescue. Sometime later, while resting together in the snow, the Huskies begin to hear the snow truck approaching, and Max tries to wake up their leader, but she doesn't seem to respond. When they arrive on the scene, Jerry rushes to check the chains, and is devastated to realize that Jack hasn't managed to free himself to survive, and has ended up losing his life and is buried in the ice. Press F for Jack. Despite this, the man decides to check the rest of the chains, and as he does so, he notices that the other dogs have managed to get loose. Just then, the group sees Max appearing in the distance, accompanied by the rest of the pack. Thrilled, the team members run to meet up with their dogs, who run towards them extremely excited. Jerry then gathers his dogs in front of him, feeling relieved that he has at least managed to rescue most of them. Without wasting any time, the group prepares to leave, but at that moment, Max runs towards the mountain, causing the guide to have to chase him. On arriving at the site, Jerry sees Maya lying on the ground, and believing that the leader was unable to resist her injuries, he begins to cry along with Max. However, when he hears the voice of her owner asking for forgiveness, Maya opens her eyes and the man is relieved that she is still alive. Quickly, Jerry and Max take the pack leader to the vehicle, and the trio are thrilled to discover that one more of the animals is safe. Now that they are together again, the group puts all the dogs in the snow truck and leaves the terrible ice desert behind. Finally, the members of the research base travel back home with their brave pack, and to honor Jack, who was about to retire, Jerry leaves a tombstone in front of the site, with the collar of his old friend, the little dog who remained at his post until the last second of his life. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.